on today's StoryBeat.
If you think you're good at something and you're willing to do what it takes to get there, there's nothing that's going to stop you, so you may as well jump in. I would just say go see as much as you can and read. You know, people, I just encourage people to read all the time. I've definitely gone through periods where I don't read and I just get back into it. I'm like, oh my God, why did I leave it for the last 3 months? Because it will constantly give you inspiration and ideas for stories and for just living a life of like wanting to tell stories is really about observing the world around you and taking in as much information as you can.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Crystal Manich, has directed over 90 productions of opera, plays, musical theater, and circus across the USA, Argentina, Australia, and Europe. Her work has been acclaimed by the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and other major publications for her lively and imaginative staging. She wrote and directed her first opera libretto, Time to Act, written with composer Laura Kaminsky, which premiered at the Pittsburgh Opera in 2026. I saw Time to Act and found it to be very well written, hard-hitting, and compelling. She's also the writer-director of Triângulo, a mixed martial arts opera that premieres in 2027. Crystal served as artistic director for the Cirque du Soleil's Crystal and previously on Quidam. She directed the opera The Copper Queen as a Western thriller feature film for Arizona Opera, garnering an award at the 2021 Toronto International Women Film Festival. She was nominated for the 2021 Chicago Emmy for a multi-camera live stream of Daniel Catan's Spanish-language opera La Hija de Rappaccini for Chicago Opera Theater at the Field Museum. Crystal holds a BFA in drama directing and a master's in arts management from Carnegie Mellon University, a certificate in business and management of entertainment from UCLA Extension, and a professional certificate in screenwriting from UCLA. So for all those reasons and many more, I'm honored and delighted to have the multi-talented writer-director Crystal Manich join me today. Crystal, welcome to StoryBeat.
Thank you, Steve.
It's a great pleasure to have you here. So let's go back in time a little bit. How old were you when the showbiz bug first bit you? When did you first start looking at all this stuff?
When I was 12, actually. I had seen some theater shows before, actually, you know, a lot of shows that I have actually directed now, like Fiddler on the Roof was one of the first musicals I ever saw. But the bug really hit me when I was 12. A couple of things coincided that year. I went on a school trip to Toronto to the Pantages Theatre to see Phantom of the Opera. And I had never seen spectacle live like that in my life. And I remember during that first scene change after the explosion of the chandelier in the prologue, all of the sheets, you know, in that beautiful production, all the sheets that were covering the proscenium all seemed to disappear magically, and all of a sudden we were transported back in time. And I remember looking at that going, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life, and I didn't know it was the scene change that I thought I was going to be an actress, you know, because I wanted to be Christine, I wanted to, you know, do all of that. So, but I fell in love with theater, and I had. I was living in outside of Pittsburgh in Peters Township at the time, and we did, you know, middle school musicals, and I was regretting I didn't do the one in 6th grade. So in 7th grade, my first performance was as a sister and a cousin and aunt in a reduced middle school version of HMS Pinafore. And I've never done a Gilbert and Sullivan since. So it's really funny that that's how it started.
Was it the magic of what was happening before you that really drew you in?
Yeah, I loved film, you know, growing up, and my mom raised me on old movies from the 40s through the 60s. So I was really well versed in those older films, and I loved black and white and all of that. But then, you know, the special effects happening live in front of me, I think, is what got me. And then the stories, obviously. I started getting really into storytelling and trying to get into character myself by singing musical show tunes in my room, when I was little. And so it was a really incredible thing. And I really thought I was going to be a performer. I was a good dancer and a good actress, but I was a horrible singer. And I had to admit it to myself in high school. It's like, singing is not what I'm meant to do.
So as a horrible singer, you wind up doing nothing but working on things where people sing.
Exactly. I think it was like a wish fulfillment. I always say that I respect singers so much for what they can do because I couldn't do it. But I do think that music has always inspired me. I see images when I hear music. I'm inspired by the sounds of certain instruments and want to understand what it means dramatically. And I think that has really led me down a path of opera musical theater.
So you went to school at CMU and got a degree as a directing major. So obviously you've done a lot of directing, and now you're also doing some writing. Do you think of yourself as a director primarily, or do you now think of yourself as a writer-director?
Yeah, I think I'm still primarily a director, but I have written so much now, especially since COVID. That's really where I got so many of these projects going and other projects that had been on the back burner. So, I've written a few screenplays. I've written these 2 stage shows. I'm writing another libretto. I started another one recently. So I'm really trying to balance out the two because I really want to continue to do the writing. So I guess I'm a writer-director now, which is a really crazy thing because I never thought I would get to that point. I always wanted to be a writer, but couldn't make the time. And then COVID gave me the time, and I took it. And now it's a part of my life. So.
Well, as a director, you're obviously creating something, interpreting something out of the writing. You're trying to draw something out of it that is not actually there on paper. You have to see it stood up in order to understand what the full impact of it is. Do you think that your ability as a director for all these years is what has helped you to become a good writer?
Absolutely. I think working on some of the greatest works in the operatic repertoire that have strong libretti, like La Bohème, like the Mozart operas, I think all of that experience certainly counts for something when you really have to look at a text and say, what makes this work and why is this important, and what are the flaws in what's written as well, because we all know that even the best operas have dramaturgical challenges sometimes. So yeah, for sure, I think just reading all that material and working on it has definitely led me down this path.
Well, I don't think there's any such thing as perfect. Everything has something in it that could be improved in some way. I think there are certain productions that I've seen, I know you've probably seen them as well, where you think, wow, this was perfect. But even still, if you stop and analyze it, there's something that you could have done maybe different, better, whatever that might be.
Of course, always. It's never done. I think the only way that something is done is, opening night just determines that it's done. But I think we would all keep going if we had our druthers.
Well, Lorne Michaels, the longtime producer of Saturday Night Live, has famously said, we don't go up at 11:30 because we're ready. We go up at 11:30 because it's 11:30.
Exactly.
It's just time. It's time to go. That's it. So what do you think that your training as a director at CMU and whatever your other education is from UCLA, what do you think you've taken away from that education that has held you in good stead for all these years?
Well, Carnegie Mellon was intense. It's a conservatory style program within a larger university. So, you're taking core classes in the larger university in addition to all of your all the demands of the program that we had. And I think that really set me up for a busy life in the theater, because I think that, I juggle multiple projects at once professionally, and I don't think I could have done that if I hadn't learned that early on in school. And you don't just do one thing at a time in this kind of life usually. So yeah, that was really amazing. And I think with UCLA, what I learned from both of the different programs that I did, one through extension and one through the film, television, and theater department, was about how to translate ideas that I've had in my head to film and television. I really just wanted to expand my vocabulary. I directed a lot of film projects during COVID, and it brought me back to my love of film, especially old style filmmaking. And I really value the writing skills that I picked up. Being able to enter a class, even though it was remote, for almost an entire year, and being forced to submit pages every week really taught me how to manage my time, and also that a couple of hours a day, whether it's 1 hour or 3 hours, you really do chip away and you'll get to the end.
No doubt. If you're going to direct something, obviously you have to move ahead with some dispatch. You can't do just a half a scene a day for, you'd be there forever. But as a writer, you can kind of chip away at 2, 3, 4, 5 pages a day and get something really accomplished over a relatively short period of time. That doesn't mean it's going to be any good, right?
No, and I've talked to young students, like I spoke to a high school recently in Florida, performing arts high school, and the thing that they said they struggle with is just either getting started or being afraid of not finishing. And I think because we think about, I have to sit down and write it all at once, but that's just not true. It's a process. And I was really being encouraging, saying, look, you can just work on it a little bit every day, and after 6 months, see where you're at. You'll have more than you realize.
Well, in fact, that is the best technique, is to just, it's the old cliche, how do you eat an elephant? Well, one bite at a time. And that's the way you get through it. And that's one of the things that stops people from writing big pieces. People can write a small, short page account piece, but the big piece will sometimes stymie people because it seems so daunting. But it really is just a lot of little pieces all put together.
Yeah, that was the biggest takeaway for me. So now when I just have an hour for writing, I take it, because I just think, well, I'll be able to achieve something in that hour.
Even if it's only a page, that's something. So you obviously had this training at CMU as a director. Were you directing operas at CMU at the same time?
No, I fell in love with opera at age 16. By 16, I realized I wanted to be a director. My drama teacher at Mount Lebanon High School outside of Pittsburgh pointed it out to me, that she thought that I was a great actress, but that I was a leader and that I had vision for a bigger picture. And so I directed my first scene, which was from Fiddler on the Roof. There that piece comes back again. And it comes back again later on in my career. And directing that scene really changed my life, and I realized that that's what I loved to do. So I went to see my first opera.
What was it that happened during that moment that really spoke to you?
I prepared it for days. Drew little ground plan, drew little figures moving in space at certain times. Oh, he'll lift the fork here, and she'll put down the knife there, and it's Seitel and Model setting the Sabbath table, and when I got there, I was so well prepped that I just threw the script away, and I was working with who was there. And we were, I just remember my friends Tom and Sarah, I'll never forget, we just created the scene together. It was just incredible. And the three of us were really in sync in that moment. And I thought, oh, this is cool. This is like we're creating something.
And are you still doing that to this day?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The same thing. I over-prep everything so that I can get in the rehearsal hall and then forget about it, or do some version of it, or with the people I'm working with, if they have a better idea, why not?
Does it have an equivalent for you as like a coach of a sports team, where you prep your game, and then you sort of go into it, and then all hell breaks loose and you have to then adapt from there? Is it similar?
Oh, absolutely. Everything from you don't have the people that you thought you were going to have. Maybe someone had to get replaced, and then you have to work with someone new, and then how do you adjust to that so that the show can still be good and that they can still be good. And I like to think that I can really see into actors and singers, that I can see what their strengths are and try to bring those out as much as possible in the character.
When you say you can see into them, is that what you mean, is that you can see what their strengths and weaknesses are, or is there something beyond that?
I think I just get a very strong vibe from people within 5 minutes of me working with them. And I can somehow intuit their insecurities and the places where they feel good, right? And so I try to, but I don't tell them this, right? I just work with them, and I try to bring the best out of them. And sometimes, with opera singers too, it depends on what kind of training they've had. So many of them have had acting training, and so many of them have not. And everyone comes from a different background in opera. So I meet everyone where they are, and I try to just encourage and being specific about, okay, let's talk about character. Let's really go to the text. Let's forget about the music for a second. Okay, now let's listen to the music, and what's the music telling us? And I get them in their bodies if they need that, and it's really been successful. For me, trying to get everyone on the same page in the show.
So you could be terribly dangerous, I assume, if you can actually sense people's insecurities. You could just cut them off at the knees at almost any time if you chose to.
Well, I like to think that I use my powers for good and not ill.
You have a moral sensibility, you don't use it for evil.
Yeah, exactly. No, I want people to be and I also think that we should be having fun in the rehearsal room. I think there's so much emphasis, especially nowadays, and especially in classical music, on perfection. I'm always saying that I think perfection, like you said, there's no piece that you can say is perfect or performance. I say that in the room from the beginning. I always, if there's a conductor I've never worked with and the singers, I say, look, let's make mistakes. I want to hear, if your voice cracks, great. We'll just figure out how to make it so that you're not straining in that way, or let's just go for it. You're going to sing out of tune sometimes. It's okay until we figure out what physically we're doing. If it's a really physical opera too, you have to really manage the musicality with the physical. So it's I think that's all a part of, failure in rehearsal is what we should be doing.
So perfection sometimes is what gets in the way of good.
Yeah, absolutely. Because wanting perfection is all about having fear. Fear of not achieving it really holds you back from being creative. And I've seen that in people, and I have to say I've released a lot of people from that. Just from creating a room that is open to this kind of creative process and trying to make it positive for everyone.
So a person that is a performer that comes into the room fearful of whether their own performance or the whole production or whatever they're afraid of, you have a way of taking that fear and tamping it down or removing it, yeah?
Yeah, I think it's about vulnerability. I think a lot of people are afraid to be vulnerable, even though they're performers. Sometimes, we don't know what people have been through. And I think there is a lot of, for whatever reason, a lot of people have traumatic experiences training for these different artistic disciplines. And, a teacher said this to you, oh, you can't act, or, oh, there was someone at CMU who told a professor of mine that I couldn't direct, right? So these are all things that haunt us, and that really, and we can either choose to let them continue to haunt us, or we can just keep moving forward and keep developing.
Have you dealt with people that have fear of success?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Yes, I do know a couple. There are people who are afraid of that. I think, for sure in some of the film stuff that I've done, that definitely happens as well. But yeah, I think in general, people are afraid of getting out of their comfort zone. I would say that's what really it is.
And being criticized and not knowing whether they're any good or not, or then having the feeling that, they have their own suspicions that they're no good. And so they worry that others will see it, so they're afraid to even expose it. It's a very strange business we're in. We're dealing with people and their personalities all day long, especially a director, that's for sure. So now you direct operas, plays, circus, and also musicals. Is your approach to all of them the same?
Yes, I come to it all the same, but they are different disciplines. I think, directing an acrobat is very different from directing an actor or a singer. There's just a different, I think there's just a different threshold of what you're saying and when. Timing, I think, is everything. And there are technical things that you have to be aware of too. Like if you've said to a performer who's an acrobat, let's say I've worked with a contortionist on a circus show I directed in 2024. She's got to warm up in order to do the rehearsal that I want her to do. And if I get delayed or I'm behind and she's cooling down, that's a problem. And that's a consideration that I need to be aware of so that, she can do the rehearsal. Otherwise, her body's just going to be, it's going to be much harder for her. And that puts a psychological burden on a performer that you don't want to have, when you're going to do something important like that. So a lot of it's about consideration as well.
So as opposed to just a straight play where the actors are going to come in, they may warm up, some of them may not, and they go through the motions, they're not taxing their body usually in a major way. But an athlete or some kind of a circus performer or an opera singer, they're dealing with their physical body in a way that requires a certain attention be paid to it, correct?
Absolutely. And with opera singers, there's always the question of, are they going to sing out in this rehearsal or not? And sometimes, most of the time, I don't worry about it because when you're getting stuff on its feet, you can kind of have them what we call marking, and they don't have to sing full out. But then I have to consider okay, this next time we run it, I'd like to hear it sung full out, because when they're singing full out, they will physically be a little different. I mean, that's just inherent in how the instrument works. So I will sometimes ask them, hey, tomorrow when we run this, would you be comfortable warming up so that you can sing full voice? And that's a discussion that I have with the conductor and all of that. So yeah, I get it is being considerate about making sure that that communication is very clear.
And what do you do if a performer says to you, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to strain my voice. What do you do? What do you do as a director?
It's happened. The thing to do in those situations is to stay calm, obviously. I mean, my ego is going to want to go, yeah, you're going to do what I tell you. But that's what we call the inside voice. The outside voice says, okay, when can we agree that we're going to do this? And let's talk to maestro, let's talk to the conductor and see, and then, come up with a plan, because some people just need a plan. And again, it's about adjusting to personalities and how, every performer has a different process. And part of being a director is just being able to be sensitive to those processes. And, directing is really just mostly managing people all the time. The story, sure, that gets told too, but most of the job, I would say, is the management of people. And you're constantly, there's a fantastic directing book called Notes on Directing that has like bullet points of what it is to be a good director. And I'll never forget, one of the major things that the book emphasizes is that remember that as a director, you perform all day. You are performing all day long. Your actor's only performing for as long as they're in the room. So, how do you want to be perceived, and what's your comportment?
All of the artistic roads lead through you. You're Rome, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly.
So everybody's coming up and asking you what you want done. The technical people are asking you, the actors are asking you, the conductor's asking you, sometimes the musicians might ask you, the stage manager's asking you. Everybody's asking you what to
Designers,
do, right?
Yeah, designers, everybody. It's a lot. Some days it's like, okay, just fielding all of these, making decisions all day long. I mean, that's what it is.
Is it exhausting?
I find it invigorating, I mean, certainly after if you're in an intense process for several days at a time and, all of that, it can be daunting, and that's why days off are so good to have. But there are so few of them in production period,
Well,
so
I've
learned how to manage my time and my energy. And a lot of it just has to do with, how I eat and when I eat, and just keeping that going. And it's just super important.
And are you able to make that happen as you need it to, or do things sometimes happen in production where you can't follow your routine?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Things get in the way all the time. Certain shows need you to be in the theater for 12 hours a day. Some don't. It just depends on the production. But I try to plan things out as much as I can to try to keep healthy, during all of that process. And water is important.
Well, there's no doubt you've got to keep healthy, because if you're not healthy, then everybody's in trouble. Of the 4 disciplines that you're most into, again, plays, musicals, opera, and circus, is there one of those 4 that is your favorite, the one that you would, if you only were able to do one for the rest of your career, that would be it?
Well, it's funny because, when I started directing in school, we were focused on straight plays, and we of course it was a classically based program, so a lot of Shakespeare and Ibsen and Chekhov, and then moving into other more contemporary things. But so I really loved that, but all the while that I was there, I was scheming in my head, how do I apply this to opera? How can I figure out how to apply this directing knowledge and dramaturgical rigor to operatic works, and I didn't know how to do that because I just didn't know how opera worked. And then when I got to walk across the quad to the School of Music, because my directing professor got me a gig directing opera scenes during my senior year, I started learning, like, oh, this is so weird. Like, working with singers was very different than actors, and I was learning on the job, with these other students, and it was pretty incredible to make that leap, but I made it work for myself. And when I finished those scenes, I knew that that's what I wanted to focus on. But, I never saw myself as just staying in opera. I didn't think I would become an opera director exclusively. I thought, well, maybe I'll be able to do some opera, and I'll just try to do some plays in New York. I mean, I didn't know, I was just like, I'll just go to New York and see what happens, but then I ended up just assistant directing opera. So I think now, and then, Cirque du Soleil came along, and I joined them for one tour in Brazil as an assistant artistic director, and then many years later as artistic director of a tour. And I think I love all of these things. I really do. But opera obviously is the one I've done the most at this point. And so by default, I'll get into an opera rehearsal hall, and it's like riding a bike. It's like, okay, I know how to do this really well. And it's definitely more of a facile activity
and
for
you
me.
love it.
But
You have passion for it.
absolutely, I love it. Yeah, it's wonderful. But I can't choose one over the other and say if I could just do, if I could write the rest of my life, I think I could be pretty happy. At this point, I'm pretty thrilled with that part of my life.
That could turn into more of a desire then at some point. If all you did was write for a while, you'd probably have a desire at some point, I want to get back into the game again and direct. But right now you're doing so much directing that you want to write. I mean, that's how that sometimes works.
That's always how that goes, pendulum, yeah.
So of those 4 disciplines, again, the 2 that I think are the closest would be opera and musicals, because you're dealing with singers and musicians and all the rest of it, and big fancy sets and technical elements and lighting and all the rest of it. Do you think that musicals and opera are truly similar, or what are the differences between the 2?
They're similar in that, especially like the really good musicals, the music is really really good at telling the story, and you can glean so much about character from the music. The biggest thing is the dialogue, and the performer that you need to do musical theater needs to know how to do dialogue really well and be facile at it. But then, for the musical component, sometimes when we go to musical theater, we don't always see those 2 things being sort of equally, they're either a really good singer, maybe not as great of a actor with the dialogue, or vice versa. And certainly I've been directing a lot of musicals at opera companies where we've mixed together opera singers and musical theater people, and it's pretty incredible because they learn from each other, and then you're seeing them run lines together, and the opera singers sort of trying to adjust about, oh, how do I deliver this line? And so that's really where the difference, I think, really lies. And of course, dancing versus not dancing, all of that has to be taken into consideration as well.
Sure. Sure. Well, that's yet one more element that gets thrown in there. I think of musicals, and I actually think of musicals as being the highest of the bars because there is not a whole lot of dance typically in opera, but suddenly you have dance in a musical, singing, all the technical elements. I think of that as as an overall piece, slightly higher bar because of the dancing. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that it definitely requires, at least from a directing perspective, a lot more thought about, how all those pieces move together. And what I can think most clearly about is the chorus. Sometimes certain operas, you just need a chorus to just be a group of people that is an overwhelming emotional thing for one single soloist, like I don't know, in the opening of Otello by Verdi, there's just all these people in a storm, and it's the music is so heightened, and the visual of having all these people just like essentially yelling in this rainstorm is enough, right? But in a musical, I feel like you really need to draw out each chorister as an individual character. In The Fiddler that I've been directing around the country, that started in Cincinnati last year, I've been really focused on who these individual characters are, and we gave them we took the names that Jerome Robbins gave to his chorus at the world premiere of Fiddler. We took those list of names and assigned them to our different choristers and their Yiddish names, and so and each name has a meaning, and so my assistant was able to put together a sheet so that people could see what their name meant. And I said, okay, I want you all to build your character based on your character's name and what the name represents. And it's amazing when you give people that permission and that responsibility that they take it, and all of a sudden you're seeing individuals up there. You're not just seeing, a herd of cats in Anatevka. You're actually seeing people who are interacting with each other in specific ways, and it's really great.
So how did this herd of cats get into Fiddler on the Roof? I'm kidding. That would be Andrew Lloyd Webber. That's a whole other show.
Oh, or Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, right?
There you go. I hope someday, if you haven't already, that you get to direct some of the great, for lack of a better word, rock opera musicals. That would be, The Who's Tommy, or Sweeney Todd is generally thought of as an opera or operetta, or Les Mis. Those are sort of more like operas than they are your typical book musical.
Well, and I listened to those so much, when I was 12, 13, 14 years old. And, I would love to do a JC Superstar sometime. I think that would be a great challenge. Yeah, there's definitely some titles. And I'm doing my first Rodgers and Hammerstein Cinderella this summer at Charlottesville Opera in Virginia. And I'm really excited because I grew up watching the Leslie Ann Warren 1960 version, because it was on the Disney Channel all the time when I was a kid for some reason in the 80s and 90s. But so I really, it's sort of like another bucket list thing I get to do.
Well, I hope you get to do your whole bucket list, whatever that would be. All right, so let's talk about your directing process a little bit. You, as a director, have to come in, correct me if I'm wrong, in a sense and exude some form of confidence. Correct?
Yes, definitely.
Have you gone into situations like that where you actually weren't confident, but you had to exude it anyway?
Oh, yeah.
Is there a trick for you? Is there a psychological trick that you do that gets you through that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, there are different factors that make me feel that way. Sometimes it's who the cast is, if they're people that I deem names, and I'm like, oh God, I don't know anything about this, or if it's a piece that I'm still struggling with, wrestling with the piece. But I have learned to just rely on the fact that a friend of mine gave me this advice when I was really nervous. Earlier on in my career, I used to get really much more nervous than I do now, and he said, Crystal, you're just going to walk in that room and the piano will start playing and you'll know what to do, because you have been doing, at that point, I've been doing it for about 10 years. And he was right. You just walk in, and once the downbeat happens, and it's like, okay, one piece, it's like that one day at a time thing with writing. It was the same thing. It's like, we do 1 or 2 scenes a day. That's it. That's all that we need to focus on. And eventually, that really helps get me through. It's just focusing on, okay, what is the important thing here? And that's that we're telling a story. And everything else about the fear of being judged or whatever, that's all ego stuff. And I've trained myself to kind of try to, quiet that down.
Well, for sure. How long do you think you were at the directing game before you thought, was it in college? Was it when you were 16? When did you think to yourself, you know what, I not only like this and want to do it, but I think I am pretty good at it and I'm good enough to be a professional where people are going to pay me for it? Was there an epiphany for you at some point?
I think I always had that ambition and that hope that I had what it took to make it. I just didn't know necessarily how to start. And when I learned that there is a sort of rite of passage in opera where you start as an assistant director, I thought, well, I can do that, and I started seeking out, being an assistant director because I knew that I was going to be able to learn from people. And that's exactly what happened. I was in rehearsal so much for many years, assisting, and then started directing. And I think that, it's sort of, there wasn't necessarily an aha moment, but it was definitely like okay, I know that this is a building block to what I want to do.
What are the most important lessons you think you learned from the great directors you work with? You can name names or not, it doesn't matter. But what lessons do you think you learned?
Well, I have to tell you that Leonard Folia, who is a name, Broadway director, I saw his production of, he did the original production of Masterclass about Maria Callas, the opera singer, on Broadway, and then that toured with Faye Dunaway back when I was in high school, and I went to see it. And I didn't really know who Maria Callas was. I didn't really know opera yet. I was 15. And that play, seeing that play, really inspired me in so many ways. First of all, the Maria Callas, I was like, this is a fascinating character. Who is this? And that's what made me pull out my first opera recording from the library and listen to opera for the first time, was her recording of Tosca by Puccini. And then the second thing I took away from that production was the directing. I thought that it was so beautifully directed. It was so simple. It was powerful. I felt something, and it was just, it's just one set and a piano. That's all it was. It was a set made to look like a concert hall, and so I never forgot the name Leonard Folia. And then I was able to assist him at Washington National Opera on his production of Moby Dick that had its world premiere in Dallas many years ago, that my best friend that I met subsequently worked on as a choreographer and assistant director for him. But because now I was at the Kennedy Center assistant directing shows and I knew Moby Dick was coming, I said to the production director, I said, please, my best friend is the choreographer of this. Leonard Folia is a legendary director that I have built my career on. Can I please assist Moby Dick? And they put me on it. So that was great. And being in the room with Lenny every day really taught me a lot. He created he was calm. He created a really good environment, like what I've always valued. And, he really let people create. He didn't hold people in a tight leash. He said, okay, well, here's the circumstances. And it was a remount at that point, but he was letting it be new with people. And that was something that I had been working on at that time, to try to be that kind of flexible director. And it was nice to see it in action, because all of a sudden, this guy's becoming Starbuck and this guy's becoming Ahab, and on their own terms. And it felt like in a live room, rather than, okay, we're just going to go through the motions and you stand here and you stand here and this is our remount. It was actually, he was revisiting the material all the time, which was great. And he also listened to everyone in the room. He listened to me if I caught something or had a small suggestion. Definitely listened to my friend Katura, who was, his associate and the choreographer. There was just an endless collaboration happening between him and everyone in the room and on the stage. And so I didn't tell him about my love for him since I was 15 until I wrote him an opening night note. and I wrote him the whole thing. And because I didn't have the courage to say anything to him, so I gave it to him. And because, he's intimidating. He's a wonderful man. And we still, we keep in touch, and I see him every now and then. But, he's intimidating. He's larger than life in the best way possible. He's very quiet and very introspective. But, man, he's so brilliant. And he wrote me an email the next day, and he said, "Thank you for your note." And that's all he said. And it was such a nice, connection to make there with him.
Well, you learned from him, I gather, that one of the important aspects of directing is to let other people do their thing.
Yes. What are they good at? Yeah, absolutely.
And that's another of your skill sets, isn't it? That you can tell what people are really good at and what they might be their weaknesses. And so you can either help them with the weakness or not feature the weakness.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right.
So, all right. So let's talk for a moment about Time to Act, which is your first libretto, which I saw here in Pittsburgh, and it was fascinating to see because it was, where did the idea come from? Was it your idea or did somebody bring it to you?
Actually, it was brought to me by a friend of mine who's a conductor, and he's the general and artistic director at Opera Santa Barbara in California. He's Greek. He called me shortly after the shooting in Parkland, Florida, and said that he was really inspired by the fact that so many of the students who were speaking up about the tragedy were theater kids, and that they were the ones really hastening this big movement to expose that there's a problem in American high schools with violence and among young people. And he said, I had a vision. What if the Sophocles play Antigone is being worked on and performed by a group of high school students in a drama class, and they don't really understand it, and then something happens in the school, maybe it's a school shooting, that then propels them to believe that theater is something that can help them get through the process of grieving or of the tragedy. And so I started with that. It morphed since then. It became about the aftermath of a school shooting in another school, but that a new student came to interrupt the flow of this school, and we find out that her brother was the perpetrator, because I wanted to really parallel Antigone in a lot of ways, and that there was an epiphany, in the play in that way. So that development, took 6 years to sort of figure out that story, come to that story.
So that it took you 6 years from somebody saying, here's an idea, to it being viable to be produced. Is that right?
Yeah, and it was... Part of that was because I was working with one composer on it for a little while, but then that relationship just didn't work out, and I thought that the piece was dead after that. That happened in I think it was end of 2019 or something like that. And then when that same friend, that conductor, Costis, brought Laura Kaminsky, the composer, into the mix, he said, Laura's interested in this. And she was very well known and had a lot of operas under her belt. She's actually one of the most produced contemporary composers in America. And of course, I got really nervous. I said, well, I don't believe you. I don't think she's interested, but whatever. I'll have a meeting. And by golly, she was interested. And she really is, someone who helped me reshape the story a little bit, because we started having collaborative conversations about it. And then we ended up pitching, I wrote a new outline, and we ended up pitching it to a lot of people. And the first company I pitched it to was Pittsburgh Opera, because I had this good relationship.
Did you have a full libretto written prior to her seeing it, or were you approaching her with just an idea?
No, I had like 8 versions of what I would call a bad libretto.
Just 8.
Just 8 that I had worked on. That I sent her the one that I felt decent enough. I said, look, this is not set in stone, but here's version 6 or whatever it was, because I didn't like the other 2. And from there, we were able to really reshape what the story was. And after that happened, and I sat down to write what is, I started from scratch again. It was really great. But I remembered, and I would look back at some of the lines that I had done already, and I used some of those. But in general, it was a whole new libretto by the time summer of 2024.
It's not a true adaptation of Antigone. It's sort of loosely inspired by Antigone, right? And
yes.
So you created all the characters from scratch. You created the scenario, the plot, etc., all from scratch.
Yeah, and a lot of it came out of research that I had done, on these tragedies, and tried to find these parallels, and also spoke to my friend Lindsay Forty, who is a set designer that I met when she was a student at BU at Boston University. She designed a set for me her senior year, and I found out she was from Sandy Hook. But I met her before the Parkland, like a month before the Parkland incident happened. So when all of this started, I called her and I said, I want to write an opera about this. What do you think? And she gave me her thoughts. And she ended up being the scenic and costume designer for the Pittsburgh Opera production, because I said to the company, it's really important to me that we have someone on the team who really has lived through this, and this is the person. And so I felt like it was all kismet. It really worked out in a beautiful way.
So when you sat down to write this, you wrote the libretto before any music was set to it, correct?
Yes.
And so once Laura Kaminsky comes in and starts setting music to your words, did you have to change anything in order to fit the music, or how did that work?
Yeah, sometimes. When I wrote the libretto, I didn't write it in a vacuum. I was sharing her big chunks as I was finishing them. We also had a dramaturg. And so the three of us would be, that whole summer of 24, we were in constant conversation. So that was great, because I was able to do edits and adjustments in it while I was still moving forward. And then by the time Laura got to it, after we did a libretto workshop at Boston Conservatory, she started doing the same thing, sending me pieces of the composition with a MIDI recording. MIDI recordings are what they are. They're not the best, but they give you a really clear sense of what it is. And, I would make comments. I would say, I thought that when I was writing this, I was imagining a little bit more space for this reason. Or, I pictured this, because I pictured the music in my head in a weird way. And I said, I pictured this at a different tempo. And she was really collaborative on that. On the flip side, she said to me, look, I think that this has there's too much text here. Is there a way that we can strip it away? What is the essence? And so I would rewrite it, and we'd get to it. So it was a really great lesson in another form of collaboration that I had never done before.
Well, yeah, because you have the words, and in a musical, if you're going to write a musical, the typical way to do it, it isn't always done this way, but the typical thing is to write a play and then figure out where the songs go, and then usually you take out chunks of the play and make songs out of them, or those emotional moments, whatever those are. In this case, everything is sung through. It's all recitative or some kind of a song. And that makes it a little more challenging if you have a lot of text, because that's just a big chunk to write music to.
And I know that I overwrite. And you know what? It's better than underwriting,
that's okay.
I think.
Overwriting is a good thing, because you can always cut. It's much harder to pad.
Totally. And, we had to decide early on in the outline. We decided, okay, where are the arias? Where are the ensembles? I think this is a quintet, whatever the thing is. And that was helpful for, how to write it as well, because I already knew in advance what those places were.
Do you think that of the three legs of a opera and a musical, that being the book, the story, the lyrics, in this case it's everything, the whole text is lyrics in case of an opera, or the music, of those three legs, do you think one is more important than the other?
I think if you don't have a strong overall sense of, like, what is the major question that has to be answered in this it's that dramatic question thing. I don't think an opera can work, and I think, I mean, maybe nothing can work, but I think in opera specifically, opera really has to hang on one major idea with lots of different threads coming out of it. I think at one point my libretto was just about a lot of different things, and I had to hone in on, okay, no, this is about Alona, this is about this girl, and how she affects the entire atmosphere with her story, and her story has to culminate in something positive, that the group unites because of her, and that Tyson, her antagonist, finds his light because of something that she's doing. And so that became very clear as I was writing it. What is that spine?
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because my whole thing is that it isn't a musical or an opera unless there's a story. You need that story to make it what it is. Otherwise, you can have the music all day long, and that's called a concert. You can have that concert.
Absolutely. And also, I think there are lots of examples of operas that feel like meditations more than stories, and that's great, but they weren't intended to be meditations. So I would say that that's probably not a success in terms of when you're trying to define opera.
Well, the story in Time to Act, which is really very much focused on gun violence and what's going on in our society right now, it's a challenging show to watch. I found myself being challenged by it because it's not an easy subject, and I think that's a good thing. Were you worried about that as you wrote it? Were you concerned about this is going to be too much for the audience?
Terrified most of the time. I mean, I was dedicated and really had the conviction for it, because I thought, this is what people need right now, and people need to be uplifted by the end. Those were the two goals. But that we needed that opera, historically opera has served as a way of holding a mirror to people, just like what Shakespeare did, and opera was often, Mozart, when he wrote The Marriage of Figaro, that was controversial because the first scene opens with two servants, and you never would have had an opera about servants, that as main characters. That's just crazy, and seeing the upper class being made fun of. So I feel like that with Time to Act, I definitely had reservations, but I knew that what we were creating was going to be very impactful and special, and I just had to believe it. Otherwise, it would have been a very milquetoast performance, and I think it just wouldn't have worked.
So obviously, you also directed this, and did you enjoy directing something that you wrote, that no one else wrote? You wrote it, and did you enjoy the idea of building from the ground up?
Oh, yeah. I loved building from the ground up, and directing it. I was nervous about it because I thought, how am I going to wrestle with myself? And
Well, that was a question I had. How are you going to wrestle with yourself?
Yeah, and I would say comments like, "Who wrote this? I don't know. This is hard. This is really hard, guys." And it put the singers at ease though too, right? Because these young singers in the Pittsburgh Opera program, and also a couple people from the outside of the program, it was such a wonderful uniting experience, because the music was really hard, because Laura's music is difficult, but there's a great gain emotionally from all that rigorous work, and the subject matter. And I had to take great care to convince this group of people that this subject matter was really important for us as opera storytellers to tell. And we really got there. And it was incredible, because when we had the first workshop, almost in May of 2025, people were having a hard time dealing with it, and we worked with them. We worked with some people that helped us as well from the outside, and then in December of 25, before we started rehearsals in February, I insisted on a Zoom with everybody, and we just talked about the piece. We didn't have to read the libretto again. We had just done that in the fall of 25 and gone through the orchestra workshop. And I said, I really want to talk about let's talk about character. Let's talk about your concerns. Let's talk about anything. This is an open space. And it really helped to set up the rehearsal process to be very positive. And the questions that came up were very valid. And it was great when I was directing it, singers saying, oh, so what do you think is the backstory on this, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, that's the one part of that I didn't think about. Well, okay, well, I've got the writer right here. Let's talk about it, and that was really fun. And I'll never forget it. I mean, if that's the only time that's ever going to happen to me, I'm so grateful for it. I felt so fulfilled on opening night. I didn't even cry. Like sometimes emotion can overwhelm you. I was so in this beautiful zone where I just was taking it all in and really enjoying it. And because these are once in a lifetime potential opportunities, and to create.
I love the idea that you could not kick the writer out of the room.
Not this time. I'm sure someday someone might kick me out. Who knows?
No matter how big a pain in the ass they're going to be, you couldn't kick them out of the room.
No, and I had to take them home with me every night,
every night. What would you say was the biggest challenge throughout the whole process?
I think it was trusting every day that it was the right thing to do. There were definite days where I thought, oh God, this is so hard. How am I going to do this? Was this the right thing? And then saying, nope, this is happening for a reason. And then going in and then feeling great about it, afterwards. And the other thing, was just managing the fact that, emotionally, I mean, I'm at my hometown company. I grew up here. I am well known in Pittsburgh for my work at the opera, and now all of a sudden I'm telling people that I am also something else, which is this writer of operas, and that was terrifying. And that again is like an ego insecurity thing that I had to work through, but it was worth it.
All right. So how did you overcome your challenge? Again, what was your psychological a trick to yourself to get you through that?
I think it was knowing that I had such a huge support system in the city and with my family and closest friends. And it was funny because on opening night, Laura was sitting behind me, the composer, and I turned around and I told my friend next to me, I said, oh, that's my friend, blah, 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 over there. And Laura said, Crystal, I think this entire theater is just full of your friends. I think everyone, and she was right. I knew probably 90% of the people who were in that room. And it was, it was so great. But I think, I was just knowing that I was how lucky to premiere in a community that I loved and that I knew so well and that knew me, and that so many people in that room had known me. I had high school teachers there who had known me since I was 14. I had college professors there from Carnegie Mellon. I had, some of my parents there. So, it was crazy. It was really, it was quite incredible.
So a little less stressful while being incredibly stressful, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So that's a very, very high bar. Well, I have been having just the most amazing conversation with Crystal Manich about her career as a director and a writer and lots of opera and music and so on. And we're going to wind the show down just a little bit. And I'm just wondering, in all these experiences you've had, and you've had many, can you share with us a story that's either weird, quirky, offbeat, strange, or maybe just plain funny?
Yeah. I think I was thinking about how in opera, as an assistant director, you get really good at put-ins. When someone gets sick at the last minute, sometimes you have a day's notice and sometimes you have a couple of hours. And you, as an assistant, you just got to put in another person into the role really fast. And how do you find that shorthand? And I got really good at it because when I was an assistant director at Pittsburgh Opera, I think I did 6 or 8 put-ins or something like that in 2.5 years of being an assistant director there. And it was kind of karma in a weird way because after I assisted all those shows and I did all those put-ins, I suddenly got the opportunity to direct my own show, which was La Bohème in 2009 on the Benedum stage, which was actually the first opera I had seen when I was 16, the same production of Bohème on that Benedum stage. And 10 years later, here I was directing it myself. And I feel like the fates had it out for me because they said, well, you're so good at put-ins, we're going to make you do one right now. So we did opening night. And I actually ended up staying because there was a student matinee, and there were some of the young artists in the program who I had to direct into the student matinee. So I was staying through Thursday, through that performance. And one of our singers got sick in the role of Marcello, a baritone, and we had a Tuesday night performance. They said, well, we're gonna call someone in, and that was a guy named Michael Todd Simpson, and I had known him from before, so I said, oh, cool, it'll be great to, Todd is great, he'll be able to, do it, and he literally landed on Tuesday. The show went up at 7, and we rehearsed with him on the stage the entirety of his role in Bohème on the set from 5 p.m., maybe? We started at 5 p.m. Maybe we started at 4:30 upstairs in the Benedum Center. I can't remember. And all I remember was they said they were going to hold the house and that they weren't going to let people in at half hour like normal at 6:30. But I had to finish by like 6:40. Even though the curtain was down, the noise was going to start because it's 2,800 seat house. So the noise was going to start getting pretty intense. And I just remember we worked backwards through the show because he wanted, it was just going to be easier so that we'd already be set for Act 1 by the time we finished, so that the crew had time, to do everything else they needed to do. And when we finally got to Act 1, and it was like the fastest Act 1 I've ever directed of La Bohème. And it was the first time I directed the piece anyway, so I had to be really quick. And I just remember they opened the house and we could hear people on the other side of the curtain. And I looked at the conductor down and I said, okay, I think we have to be done. And I remember Michael Todd Simpson looking at me, he goes, okay. And I said, dude, do you remember any of that? And he goes, you know what, Crystal, we will see. And I just left the stage like, oh my God, this is a disaster. And my assistant was going to stay with him backstage and everything like that. And I remember watching the show, just clenching my seat, and he didn't miss a beat. It was incredible.
So the key there was, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, the key there was La Bohème is in his repertoire so that he could just get up and sing it. He didn't have to worry about the words or the music. All he had to worry about was the staging.
Exactly. And that's what's stressful about opera, is that you really need to find people who have done the role. And if it's some obscure, thing, it's harder. So we were lucky that Bohème's done enough that there were people to choose from, and he was available, which was also serendipitous. Well,
yeah, because obviously if he didn't know the part extremely well, the rest of it's a fail. No, there's no way you could succeed.
Oh, yeah. There's no way. Zero chance.
Normally I don't tell a sidebar on my own stuff, but I can remember doing a show when I was at USC, when I was in school there, and we had literally finished painting the stage 40 minutes before the deck was being painted 40 minutes before the doors opened. So the people went out on stage and were going on stage because it was still wet.
It reminds me of that story that who knows if it's true or not, but that on opening night of Don Giovanni, Mozart forgot to write the overture. And they said, Maestro, where's the overture? And he said, oh, just give me a second. And he wrote the overture in, I don't know, an hour or something. And then he had to send it to the copyists who had to copy it out, in ink and quill. And the rumor is that the parts went onto the music stands wet. So who knows if that's true? But the overture Don Giovanni is pretty fantastic.
That's a great theater story. It's a mystery, but it always happens. Somehow it always gets pulled off, isn't it? So, all right, last question for you today, Crystal. You've shared with us through this show just a tremendous amount of information and advice throughout the whole show. I'm wondering if you have a single solid piece of advice or a tip that you like to give to those who ask you, how do I do this? How do I get in? Or maybe they're in a little bit trying to get to the next level.
Yeah, I think it's certainly different now than it was when I was coming up. I think, every decade we sort of see these changes. And right now there's lots of challenges, I think, in having a life in the arts with funding and things like that. But what I do tell people is that if you think you're good at something and you're willing to do what it takes to get there, there's nothing that's going to stop you. So you may as well jump in. But I also say, but keep an open mind to how else you could apply what you're good at. I've definitely done things where I've, adapted my skills to do things during COVID. Certainly I did some online work that required a certain thing, but I felt like I had the skills for that because, somehow I found it through my leadership skills or whatever, through my directing. So, these things are valuable things to know. And I would say, know thyself. And certainly I don't think anyone should starve for this art. I don't think that that's actually good advice. But I do think that, you have to understand yourself and what is your threshold? What are you willing to do? You're willing to live with 5 people so that you can do this. And if the answer is no, then, you make adjustments. But I do think that you have to and know what your talents are and know to what extent you're willing to take on, the responsibility of a career like that. And also, I would just say go see as much as you can and read. People, I just encourage people to read all the time. I've definitely gone through periods where I don't read and I just get back into it. I'm like, oh my God, why did I leave it for the last 3 months? Because it will constantly give you inspiration and ideas for stories and for just living a life of wanting to tell stories is really about observing the world around you and taking in as much information as you can.
That is such wise advice. Reading is food for the creative brain. There's no question about it. Crystal Manich, this has been an absolutely fabulous Story Beat today, and I can't thank you enough for your time, your energy, and your wisdom throughout this whole thing, and keep on making opera out there.
Thank you, Steve. It was great to talk to you, and thank you for inviting me.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.